There has never been a program of this scale, moved at this speed, that has been enacted as effectively and as transparently as the Recovery Act.
Happy birthday stimulus package, but yes, that may be true, Mr. President, but even you yourself admitted it does have some imperfections.
And certainly Republicans are out there trying to point those out just as much as they can. Top Line begins right now.
Hello and welcome to ABCNews.com's Top Line. I'm David Chalian.
I'm Jonathan Karl.
We are here every day reporting the latest political headlines, insight, analysis, reporting everything you need and want to know about politics. Mr. Karl, thank you for sitting in for our colleague Rick Klein. Get us started. What is your top line?
Happy birthday stimulus. It was 1 year ago today that the president signed the $787 billion stimulus into law. Now the White House is out in force from the president and vice president on down. Officials are touting the success as they see it of this program. But of course, David, there is the problem that most of the public doesn't quite feel that success. You saw that New York Times poll that said 6% of the public, only 6% believes it's created any jobs.
That is the single biggest problem for the administration. You also saw today how frustrated the president was that the country doesn't seem to have a clue that 95% of Americans got a tax cut in this stimulus bill last year. And he knows they don't have a clue about that. They have just had a tough time selling this bill to the public. Mountain of debt. Yes, we all know just how precarious our long-term fiscal situation is here in the U.S. with all the entitlement spending. Well, the president didn't get his wish for a congressional body to sort of rein in this debt, so he's doing it by executive order, and he's named former Republican Senator Alan Simpson and the former chief of staff to Bill Clinton's White House, Erskine Bowles, a bipartisan commissioner, to head up this idea of a debt commission. John, it's not yet clear, is it, that Republicans are on board and going to play with this?
No, it really isn't. They're, of course, fearful this will become a tax hike commission, but here's the astounding fact of the day. The estimate is that interest on the debt, just interest on the debt, is going to be over $500 billion by 2014. That's just in 4 years. So at that point, 4 years from now, we get to the point where we are spending more on interest than any other non-military domestic program. It really is a debt crisis, and it's one, I mean, there's a reason why you need to have a commission or a Congress that's willing to act. Next up, tea time for Republicans. The Republican leader, the RNC leader, Michael Steele, met with Tea Party organizers late yesterday. So it appears that, in some sense, the Republicans are trying to co-opt the Tea Party movement. But, David, there are limitations. There were no cameras at this meeting. You do not see a single photograph of Michael Steele meeting with the Tea Party organizers.
No, he was down there for 4 hours with them, meeting with them, of course, in the sort of luxurious Capitol Hill Club. Or
right next to the RNC headquarters.
headquarters. But you're right. He is constantly telling them, I don't want to co-opt, but it's where the energy is in American politics, and his party desperately needs the Tea Party to join them in order to make gains this fall, as they should, because of how good the environment is for them.
Fear the extreme edges of that group.
Exactly. There's no doubt about it. And finally, Bush for Christ. Maybe not just quite, but President George W. Bush, in a joking mood last night, he and his brother, the former governor of Florida, Jeb Bush, were at a paid speaking event down in Naples, Florida. And when the topic of that Chris Rubio race in Florida came up, Jeb, of course, remained neutral, although all signs indicate that people close to Jeb are sort of lining up with Marco Rubio here in this race. But he remained neutral, criticized Chris for supporting the stimulus. And then Bush joked as he was trying to get roped into this political debate. He said, who the hell is Marco Rubio? I have no doubt that the former president knows who Marco Rubio is.
Yeah, the answer to that question is it's the guy that may well beat Charlie Crist in a shocking upset in that primary down there.
No doubt about it. We'll continue to read those tea leaves going forward. We are going to begin with the stimulus package, the one-year anniversary. We're joined by a member of the Council of Economic Advisors, one of the top economic advisors there in the White House. Austan Goolsbee joins us from the North Lawn of a snowy White House, still snowy White House. Thank you very much for being here, Austan. And let me begin with this poll number. Just take a look at this from the New York Times. If the American people were asked, has the stimulus actually already created jobs? Only 6% said yes. Will it create jobs? 48% of Americans say no. Why do they not seem to know anything about the stimulus bill that you guys claim to know?
Well, you know, I'd say two things. One is, if you go look at the polls, the majority of people think that the stimulus had something to do with the banks, which is they're thinking about the Bush TARP program. It's not the stimulus. And the second thing I'd say is, if you ask people about the individual programs, of which there are tens of thousands of individual programs in the stimulus, and you say, do you think that the money used for cash for clunkers helped stimulate auto production? Do you think that the money that kept teachers in the classroom and policemen on the beat was useful in keeping jobs? You get 60 to 80% of people thinking that those programs were effective. So I think the miscommunication here is just, what is the stimulus?
Where do you think it's going? You know, you guys have actually spent about, what is it, about a third of the $787 billion that's gone out the door?
Well, it's between a third and a half, somewhere around there, depending whether you measure obligations or outlays.
So in a real sense, the spending really starts to kick in now. This year. Do you expect, I mean, where are we going to see unemployment by the time we get to the end of this year?
Well, look, as you know, I try to stay out of the forecasting business, but I will say that I think you're absolutely right that the stimulus is peaking in the, you know, around now in the first couple of quarters of this year is when it's going into its peak impact on the economy. And no single government program is ever going to be enough to fill the 8 million job hole that was created in this deepest recession since 1929. But there's pretty broad consensus among almost all private forecasters out in the marketplace, as well as nonpartisan CBO, as well as the CEA's information that you can find. We put out a quarterly report that so far this has created about 2 million jobs so far. And you know that we are on path to get to that 3.5 million target that we had laid out.
Although the CBO says it's a range, right, from 800,000 to 2 million. It's not
to 2.4 million.
Right. So you're citing the upper end of that range. I just want to ask you though what you said about the impact on the economy still to come right now, this peak period, because Christina Romer last fall testified before Congress. She said most analysts predict that the fiscal stimulus will have its greatest impact on growth in the second and third quarters of 2009, and that by mid-2010 it will likely be contributing little to growth. That seems at odds with what you're just saying about the peak still coming right now.
I mean, we can get the numbers. I think that's when it started peaking. It's kind of bumping around at the top period. I think that's where maybe the confusion is. And then by the end of this year, it starts going down. It's still having a big impact, but its contribution to growth gets smaller as it shrinks.
Do you have some frustration, though? I mean, I know you're overall obviously very high on this program, but is there some frustration that you have not been able to get the money out quicker? I refer to a new report out by the GAO that says on the weatherization, the $5 billion weatherization program, as of December 31st, according to GAO, only about 9,000 homes had been weatherized, and they cited red tape. You know, it takes a while to get the bureaucracy in place.
You know, in a couple of the programs, we got to do more to get the money out. I think if you look as a total package at the $787 billion, as the president said in his remarks, I think you got to be it's pretty stunning how much they've been able to get the money out the door, and how much, look, if we hadn't had this massive snow shutting down kind of a third of the country over the past several weeks, we would have seen a bunch of these projects that have been on the drawing board and getting going, we would have seen them commencing. I think the Stimulus Recovery Act effort, which at the time was criticized by Republicans, but now almost everybody agrees was the totally sensible thing to do, was have an initial stage of tax cuts to businesses and 95% of workers that could get out the door right away, state fiscal relief to keep teachers in the classroom and things like that, which could get out rapidly, then a middle kind of range of incentives from the government to try to incentivize private sector activity, and then the medium range over the 2 to 3 years of these big infrastructure projects. Spacing it out over 2 to 3 years proved to be extremely important. Right. If we had just dumped the whole thing in a 6-month period at the beginning, we'd have gone way up, then we'd have come way down, and now we'd be saying, what are we going to do?
Austan Goolsbee, one of the top economic advisors there at the White House to President Obama. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Great to see you guys.
We appreciate it.